This is a production of Cornell University.
Anyway, all yours.
All right. Dr. Pimentel, I want to thank you very much for the introduction. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on how David and I first got together. It was 16 years ago. And at that point, David, I was considering going for a PhD in Yale because I needed to figure out what to do and how to calculate a shrinking economy. My graduate degree is in business, in the business of shipping, by the way. But I just couldn't even fathom what we would do to shrink our world back to the, level of about 2 billion people, which is what is sustainable on a long-term basis. Then I read a book by a guy by the name of Kennedy, who's the head of the Dilworth Center at Yale, and he's a consultant to the UNDP. And in the foreword to his book, he said, as a PhD in economics, that he was attempting to calculate exactly how we go about shrinking an economy, and he said it was beyond his comprehension. So that's another reason I didn't go looking for a PhD, because obviously that's not going to solve the problem. So David said something very important to me. He said, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, I was on the phone, I was in Greenwich, Connecticut, and David said, Sandy, we don't need another thesis collecting dust on the shelf somewhere. What we need somebody to take some action. Think of something to do to put our planet on a sustainable path. And after that phone call, my life has never been the same. In fact, David, it's cost me $100,000 or so, so thanks a lot. Okay. All right. So listen, what I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to do my very best to give you nothing but facts. They're facts as I understand them. I'm not going to distort them or in any way alter what I believe to be the truth. But what I am going to do is I am going to present them to you in a way that I don't hear anybody else talking about. Jim Hansen, who was here in April, who's probably one of the bravest men in his area that I know of because his reputation's on the line, and yet he's still speaking out about what the government doesn't want him to speak out about. So I give Jim Hansen a lot of credit. Now, I was invited up here by David not to speak about climate change in particular, but to speak about the BP oil spill, which has suddenly fallen off the radar. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to tie it into how this impacts climate change severely, but not in the way you might think. Now, I happen to have a little inside knowledge, and David thought it would be interesting because in my 20s, I used to run those tug supply vessels you see down the Gulf, the ones that are swarming around the Deepwater Horizon when it was still there, and when it was gone, they were just swimming around where it used to be. And I used to carry out the mud and what they call mud, the drilling mud, and I carried out the pipes and the personnel, and I learned a lot about the drilling industry. But I didn't really learn what I needed to know until I actually owned equipment. Then I went back to New York and I started a non-union tug and barge company, and I had very, very old equipment. In fact, I had one of those old bell boats. I was running one of the oldest tankers in New York Harbor. You used to have to go like this, ding, 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 and I'm talking the African Queen. Anyway, but what I learned was when I had old equipment, I learned that the United States Coast Guard could make or break my company with the flick of a wrist. If I put one of my tugs or tankers on the dry dock and they came down for inspection, it was generally a 25-year-old kid out of the Coast Guard Academy who had never been in water over his head. And he'd have his white chalk and he'd be walking around and he'd be marking this and marking that. Well, if he put white chalk in the wrong place, I'm out of business. So what I needed to do, I was desperate to manipulate the Coast Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, I did it, and I'd like to tell you I was real good at it. I got those guys so they didn't know whether they were coming or going. I got, what I would do is I'd buy them a cup of coffee, and I'd talk them over here, and I'd say, Chad, look at this den over here. Man, this is really something. I'm not sure how to do that. And it's the simplest thing in the world, and Chad knew how to fix it, and I let him tell me how to fix it. And in the process, he walked by about $50,000 worth of damage and didn't say a word. But I fixed what Chad suggested. I manipulated the Coast Guard. Make no mistake about it. The other thing you need to keep in mind is the Coast Guard's business is not drilling for oil or transporting oil or pumping oil or cleaning up oil. Their job is enforcing the regulations concerned with oil. They don't know how to do it. They just know how to enforce the regulations. That's not their fault. They're very good at what they do. I think Thad Allen is a very good guy. He's a very, very bureaucratic, hierarchical master at running a very big organization. I don't think he knows the first thing at all about pumping oil, because BP pulled the wool over his eyes. They did the exact same thing I did, but they did it on a grand scale. And I think I have some right to say that, having been in the oil business and been through it myself. Also, the Planet Earthship program was presented to BP many, many years ago, and they sort of liked it. So they hired the public relations firm, the one that's responsible for all this disinformation we're getting today, to interview me along with a consultant in New York. And I talked to those guys for only 45 minutes, and at the end of that 45 minutes, I'll tell you, I didn't know if I was coming or going. They were terrific at telling me what they thought I wanted to say and what I wanted to hear, and it was just amazing. They didn't do the job because I'm after university students. I want university students on my ship and involved in this program. You're the only people in the world that are going to put this planet back on path, and I'm after you. And BP said, we're not after university students, we're after CEOs of corporations. So that was the end of it. But the message I want to leave you with is that BP is manipulating us. There is no way on God's green earth they ever should have put dispersants on crude oil. And I think it's going to come out. Eventually it's going to come out. Eventually somebody's going to figure it out. They're talking about it now anyway. Dispersants are a chemical you put on oil, and I believe it breaks down the bond between the molecules, and so it breaks up, which is great. I used it all the time. We use what we call Dawn soap, because there's a chemical in Dawn soap that breaks down the oil. So if you drop a thimble full of 2 oil off the side of your vessel, it spreads out, the size of a ping pong table. And that's noticeable. So you throw a little Dawn soap on it, and bingo, it's gone. But that's processed oil, oil that's been through the chemical process. It's uniform. We know what it is. Crude oil is mud. It's all it is. It's mud, it's gunk, it's naphtha, it's methane, and it is crude oil, and it has varying viscosities. So the first time I saw that oil pipe coming out of the Gulf like that, BP jumped its estimates from 1,000 barrels a day to 5,000 barrels a day. And I think I have a witness in this room. I looked at that for the first time. I said, oh my God, that's at least 20,000 barrels a day. And of course, I was off by a factor of 3 because it ended up being closer to 60,000 barrels a day. And when they put dispersants on it, I said to anybody who would listen, why in the hell are they doing that? You can't disperse crude oil. But BP went to Thad Allen and they said, well, Admiral, we got a terrible thing in our hand. We're guilty. We're very sorry. We're going to pick it up. We've got to start dispersing this stuff immediately. What's Thad Allen going to say? No, you can't disperse it. It's not a good idea. They pulled the wool over his eyes because you can't disperse this crude oil. If you'll notice, what they did was they broke it into the little tiny particles. Remember the pictures you saw on CNN, the little particles coming in? That's what they did. They dumped enough chemical on it so the crude oil began to come apart into little pieces. But it isn't going anywhere. So they made a mess of it. And I think it's probably going to come out that it was a pretty bad thing to do eventually. But what I'm trying to tell you is, in my humble opinion, that's what the United States government and corporations and the big nonprofit organizations are doing to us today when it comes to climate change. Can I see that first slide, Olga? Now, this is nothing new. I mean, everybody's seen this. I'm not making this stuff, but it's very easy. The temperature's going up. But there's so much disinformation out there. I'm telling you, at times, the disinformation is so good that I second guess myself. I say, shit, was I right or not? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're not warming up like that. Stop it. You can't let those people do that to us. You can't look at climate out the window, nor can you look at it from day to day or year to year. You have to look at it decade to decade. The 70s were the hottest decade on the planet until the 80s came along. Then they were the hottest. Then the 90s came along and they were the hottest. 2000 to 2009 was the hottest decade on the planet. The first 6 months of 2010 was the hottest 6 months on the planet. And I don't have to tell you about July. You know what I'm going to say about July. It was the hottest friggin' July on the planet. So the trend is upward. Climate change at this point is unstoppable, and I will explain that to you why. It could have dire consequences for humanity, or it won't get rid of us entirely, I don't think, but it will shrink us a good deal, according to a lot of people. So with all of this evidence, well, here's another one. I just throw this other one in too, which this, to me, is the logical way of looking at this. 200 billion years ago, when there was no oil in the ground and all that carbon was in the air and in the trees and the shrubs and the dinosaurs and everything, it's estimated the Earth was 10 degrees warmer than it is today. Now, if you take that carbon out of the air, do something with it, let's sequester it in the ground in the form of oil and gas and coal, the planet cools off, mammals are allowed to evolve, and here we are. Then, this particular bipedal hairless primate happened to get very smart and decided if he took that energy out of the ground, burned it, he could get more done with that energy than he could possibly do with his arms and legs. So the carbon began to go back into the air. And as the carbon begins to build up, the Earth warms up. I don't know who can argue against this, but there are people who do. So I stopped and thought about who are the naysayers. Who is arguing? What are they saying and why? And what I concluded is those people who are the most vociferous about there being no climate change, I look at them and on average, they're doing pretty well. In other words, they're not the guy who's working for $10 an hour at the paper mill. They're generally congressmen, senators, in a way, a naysayer who thinks that this climate change is crazy, and lots of wealthy people. They're generally people that are doing well and probably have less motivation than most to change their lifestyle. So it's easy for them to say that there's no climate change. The government says there's no climate change. I'm not actually sure why they're doing that. They're making a lot of noise, but they're not really attacking the issue. Then there's the average person on the street. Why doesn't he want to think about it? Well, I'll tell you why I've thought about it. He's doing the same thing his parents did. His parents behaved a certain way, went to school, worked hard, invested their money, were thrifty, they have certain things. That's the way the world works. Their parents before them and before them did the same thing. So why should I? I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I go to school, I do this, I do it. Everything is the same. The Earth is not going to change. They're too busy and they're unmotivated to change. And the last group of people, and I was discussing this with Dr. Pimentel, and I don't know if this makes any sense to you or not, but there's a psychiatrist in Australia who came up with a phenomenon to describe why people are so adamant about there being no climate change. They're doing whatever they can to convince you it's not happening. Dr. Pimentel tells me there's a guy in Canada that sends him email every week telling him there's no climate change. I don't write David and say, David, there is climate change. I don't have to do that. But this guy feels he has to say that there's no climate change because he's trying to convince himself there's not any. And this psychiatrist came up with a name for it. He called it solipalgia. Solipalgia is a state of mind that one gets if you take an indigenous people, move them off of their land into another area. Eskimos coming down into the woods of Canada and being forced to chop trees instead of hunt polar bears. They're going to live fine. They're going to have a life, but they don't like it. They're uncomfortable. It's not the way they lived for generations. Well, what's happening now is very slowly, the Earth is changing underneath us. You kids, some of you kids in here are 20-something, all right? Well, I'm 60-something, so I've got like a few years on you. I've seen a lot more change than you have, and to me, it's disheartening. So I'm suffering a little bit from this solipalgia. I don't like the fact that the Earth is changing underneath me. So I believe that there is something that goes on in the human brain that says, I don't want to have anxiety. I don't want to have fear. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel guilty. So you know what? I'm not going to. I'm just not going to do it. There is no solipalgia. So that more or less explains why people feel the way they do. Now the next slide, can I see the CO2 slide? Thank you. This again, this is the Earth's natural procession, up and down as the Earth wobbles on its axis. We have our glacier things, and they go up and down. I mean, everybody knows all about this. And then you got this thing going up here in the air. That's the carbon that we're releasing back into the air after we've sequestered it in the ground, and the human beings now figured out how to use that energy, and we're using it, and we're putting the carbon back in the air, and the Earth is warming up. So there's no surprise there. What is a surprise to me is that nobody talks about the half-life of carbon. And I've got to tell you the story. I told this to Dr. Pimentel when we were sitting down here. I recently went to a conference at Columbia. It was a pretty big deal, actually. You know, there were several hundred people in the audience. They had satellite trucks all around the building, and they conferenced in scientists from Beijing and Sydney, Kenya, London. You know, and they're all giving you this story about how dire the situation is, but they all end up on a positive note. They all say, well, you know, we'll change our lifestyle, we'll do this, we'll do that. Well, I know what we'll do. This is how we'll stop climate change. Let's increase the gas mileage on an SUV from 18 miles to a gallon to 20. You know, that's the kind of stuff they're talking about, right? So at the first half of the meeting ended at 10 minutes past 12, and they were going to have 20 minutes of question and answer, Q&A. So as it turns out, there were 4 microphones, and the lady with one microphone was sitting right next to me. So she stood up, and I stood up behind. I was first in line behind her. And they went to the first microphone, to the second, and then they came around to me. I was the third microphone, and I said, well, you know, I'm just curious why we're spending so much time talking about slowing down climate change and stopping it and reversing it and all that kind of stuff, when the half-life on carbon is 100 years. The carbon that's in the air now is there forever, as far as anybody in this room is concerned. So shouldn't we be talking in a little more serious terms about really making a difference and really doing something? Because we're not going to stop climate change. The carbon is there. It's not going anywhere. Nice guy. He was a well-known BBC fellow. You would have recognized him if you saw him. And he listened to me. He was very polite. And he smiled. And he took his papers. He went, now, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for the question and answer period. And I'd like you to come back promptly at 12:30 and hear so-and-so. And he walked off the stage and left me standing there. Now, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, guys. Why would he do that? Why would he not so much acknowledge that that is at the basis of the problem? The carbon that's in the air is going to stay there. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I drove up from Albany today, and I put some more in the air on the way up. And I'm going to put some more in the air on the way back. So we need to take this very, very seriously. We got to stop having meetings and writing papers, and we need to do something. So when I talk about climate change from this point forward, though, as young people in the world you live in today, you need to think not only about changing of the Earth's climate, but you also need to know that your economic climate is changing, your religious climate is changing, and your social climate is changing. The fabric of the civilization which you're coming into is beginning to show some wear. So we talk about climate change. All of these things are connected. We have to address them all at one time. It's not, we can't solve one problem and forget about the others. Now, I'm talking in this way with, you know, I'm painting a pretty black picture. Not pretty black, but I'm not putting a sugar coating on this. Why can I say what I'm saying when other people are, you know, perhaps not speaking in quite such strong terms? And the reason for that is I don't give a damn. That's the reason. I don't work for a big corporation. I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not in the government. I'm not going to lose my job or be reprimanded. I'm not in the military. I don't work for a big nonprofit organization. I don't report to a board of directors. I'm free to say what I'm saying, and I've been around for a while, and I've seen the changes, and I'm right. We need to put the world on a different track. The other people that are having trouble speaking out have obligations to other people. Jim Hansen, again, was a perfect example of somebody who I think was very courageous to speak out as much as he did. But most people have a job. They have superiors. University professors have to report to their administration, and the administration has a board. And who's on the board? People that are doing fairly well. They sure, well, yeah, sure, the world's warming up, but we'll take care of it. It's going to be all right. You know, we'll get a few more papers written. We're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. But that, unfortunately, is the problem. And that's why nobody is really doing this. That's why I want to reach out to young university students who are not fully integrated into society, who can afford to maybe make a change, who can realize that the world they're coming into is in very, very serious problems, and they cannot follow in their parents' footsteps. And the sad news is, you guys, no matter what you do, I don't care how hard you try, you are not going to have the life that I had and my parents had. It's a physical impossibility. There's just not enough to go around, and we're adding 75 million more people to the planet every year. That's like adding another Nigeria to the planet every year without increasing the land, the water, the air, the food, everything. We're adding more people. At some point, even the worst denier of climate change on the planet has got to admit that at some point we're going to have too many people. So something's going to happen. Either we're going to get too many people and have a major crash, or we're going to get university students to do what I did. Could you show me that? This is a little video I put together, or a friend of mine put together. There are 3 things you're going to see in this video. You know, they're going to keep flashing the same pictures over and over again. What I'd like you to notice is the extreme weather events, which is supposed to frighten you to death. But let's face it, we've had extreme weather ever since there's been weather. That's another guy. That's me with hair. That's when I was trying to be a welder. This is the other thing. It's going to have 3 things. It's going to have the extreme weather to let you know what you have to look forward to. It's going to have the Vietnam protests to let you know how my generation handled their problem. And it's going to have pictures of a sailing ship. So what I did was, I'm an ocean-going master. All right, so I came up the hawse pipe. If you know what that means I work my way up. I didn't go to a Marine Academy. And one day, I was out in the North Atlantic. I was chief mate on a tug supply vessel. We're off Sable Island, off Nova Scotia, and then we're in a storm of wind. It was so bad you literally couldn't stand up. I mean, when you walked to the wheelhouse, you had to brace yourself on both sides of the cabin. It was terrible rough. But as I was laying in my bunk, I could hear the wind, ripping the paint off the side of the house. And I thought to myself, my gosh, this is when oil prices we were in what we called an energy crisis back then. They were up around $30, which was up closer to $90 in today's dollars. And so I thought to myself, there's got to be a way you could get sails on ships and use some of that energy to save oil, reduce bunkers, and save an irreplaceable resource. And to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't care one bit about CO2 because back then I didn't know it was a problem. So, there's a picture on the screen there. So I got off and I designed this system with help from people, and I put it on the ship, and it worked like a bear. Sometimes I was able to reduce fuel consumption by 35%. On an annual basis, I reduced it by 15%. My system paid for itself in 100 days. Of all the other systems in the world, the Japanese, the French, the English, the Canadians, all these other people, they did the same thing. Of course, they did it with government money. I did it with private money. Not a one of them ever made a penny. Mine paid for itself in 100 days. So what I'm showing you is on here, extreme weather, Vietnam protests, and my alternative energy program. Now, let me ask you this. How many civilizations before ours are no longer here today because their people did not pay attention to the environmental warning signs they received? If you read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, he'll give you an excellent description of all the people that are gone now because they weren't smart enough. The Sumerians, 800 BC, over-fertilized, over-irrigated their land till the soil became too salty and wouldn't support wheat. But they didn't know that was a problem, so they switched to barley. A few generations later, there was too much salt for barley, and the Sumerians are gone. Then we have the Norsemen from Greenland, who were doing very well, cultivating the reindeer, until they got too many reindeer and overgrazed their land. They're gone. You got the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas. But the one I like the best, there it is. Now see that? Now there's how you save oil. Okay? That's what we need. We need people to go out and do things like this. When oil was shaking people up, people were really upset about oil. I mean, anything you could do. I mean, we had an oil bubble, which came before the dot-com bubble. And when I had something like this, I had Wall Street wanting to throw money at me. And I said, screw you, I did it on my own. Right? But I did it. If oil prices had stayed where they were and that continued to rise up, we wouldn't be having this talk. Now I'd be off in the sailing ship business. But oil collapsed in June of '86, and that was the end of it. So getting back to crash civilizations, the one I like the best is, and I'd like to draw a parallel between that, is with the Easter Islanders. They were doing pretty well. They had, I think, about 500 or 1,000 people living on the island or something like that, until somebody got the bright idea to cut down bigger trees, go outside the barrier reef, get tuna and albacore, and bigger fish and more protein. And they did that, and guess what? The little devils became more prolific. They started having more people, and lo and behold, they got up to 4,000 people on an island which you could walk around in 2 days. So is that anything like what the Earth is doing? Easter Island is sitting out there in the middle of the Pacific. It's like the Earth sitting out there in the middle of black space, right? Easter Island, nothing comes into Easter Island, nothing goes out. They're on their own. They didn't manage themselves properly. So they got too many people chasing too little resources. What's the first thing that happened? We have conflict. So they started separating into groups, right? That's kind of like, you know, the Hamas and you know, radical Muslims and radical Christians, and we were separating. Now I see it more. I see more. Maybe I'm making this up. Maybe I'm delusional, but I see more conflict in our world today as we're beginning to bump up against limitations. So what happens then was the Easter Islanders began to build big monuments, moais, those things. And in the moais, the bigger your moai, the better your chances God was going to save you. Well, apparently it didn't work because the Easter Islanders now are gone. That is really, literally a microcosm of what we are doing on this earth right now. I know we're smarter, we're more sophisticated, we've got lots of science, we know the energy, but we're doing the same damn thing. We are living beyond our means. We cannot keep doing what we're doing. All these people on the planet consuming a bloody thing. We need young people today to take back the planet. I really mean that very seriously. We need young people today to start doing what my group did. Now, Vietnam was different than climate change. In a lot of ways it was similar, but in a lot of ways it was different. We had some advantages. We had one very big advantage that you guys don't have. And it was huge. But you also had an advantage, which is huge, that we didn't have. And I break that down this way. We may have been drunk and stoned most of the time back then, you know, because it was peace, love, and brown rice, man. This is the 60s, right? But we had Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite was able to put Vietnam in our face every single night. So I'm in undergraduate school, and I was exempt from the draft, so I went to college, and I saw all these great, big, huge, brave, athletic men trembling in their shoes at the thought of their GPA getting too low and going over to Vietnam. That's a real inspiration to study. Let me tell you, Vietnam is a great inspiration to study. So I know that they were frightened by it because this news broadcast that we kept seeing every night, you know, with the bombs going off and the helicopters crashing and body bags coming out of the jungle. I mean, after a while, that broke through the haze and people started to protest. Here's where the disadvantages is. All we had was black dial phones. We didn't have the internet and mobile phones and Twitter and all that kind of stuff like that. So it took us a long time to organize. Plus, we didn't have anybody to organize us. You know, we were probably 6 or 8 different theories. You know, some were against the war, some were against violence, some were against abuse of women, some were against invading Cambodia. You know, everybody's protesting their own little thing. So the protests started out at 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Took us 15 years. But by the end of 15 years, we had enough people pissed off. So we had 700,000 people march in Washington. You've probably seen pictures of them on there now. That's that big march in Washington. And guess what, guys? We did it. We broke the back of the Johnson administration. Johnson couldn't take it. He left office. You know that famous speech, "I will not accept, nor will I be your president for another 4 years." You know, his Texas accent. Well, he couldn't handle it, so he left. He couldn't do it. And Nixon came in with a promise to end the war. And you know what a promise from Richard Nixon is good for. But anyway, that's what he did. He came in and he ended it. So my group of people, my generation, the burnout hippies and the bombers and whatnot, we started the movement which stopped the Vietnam War. And I want you guys to do the same thing. I know we can do it. I'm going to help you. I can't do it alone. We need the same revolution that we had in Vietnam. But the problem is, you don't have Walter Cronkite and you don't have dramatic pictures on the screen every night. And that is a huge, huge problem. I'm here at Cornell because I'm talking to some bright, very bright, successful, creative people. So you're going to have to start this movement in your heart. It's got to be in your heart and in your head. You're going to have to do it because you know it's right, and you know you're going to get your ass handed to you as the planet begins to warm up. There's nobody trying to stop this. Get a grip on it. You want to argue with me about it? I'll argue with you about it. The government's not doing it. The big nonprofits, they're literally in the back pocket of the major corporations. Did you hear any one of the big nonprofits come down on BP for what they did? Maybe they did, but I didn't hear anything about it. Nobody criticized them. The best money BP ever spent was to donate to these big nonprofits. These big nonprofits can't go out and do what I'm saying now. Nobody's going to say what I'm saying now. I'm telling you now to get off your ass. Let's start this group. Let's get going. Let's have some protests. I want to get 100,000 people signed up, and then we're going to start holding rallies. Could I just go on to the next slide there? They're probably sick of these pictures. Oh, you skipped one. You got to go back. I don't know. Yeah, all right. Here's the map that you're all looking at. Now, here's what's interesting about this. Anybody could come up with this idea who wanted to. Crazy idea. Who's going to pay for it? See these ships? Each one of these black dots is a big sailing ship. And I know something about sailing ships in case you hadn't noticed before. All right, everyone's a big sailing ship. It's sponsored by a different multinational corporation because I have developed a way for the corporations to put their money into this ship and make a huge profit. And that's all corporations care about. That's what they're in business for, increase the stockholder returns to stockholders. It's a very neat idea, and I got to tell you, maybe I'm just trying to flatter myself here, but I came within a heartbeat of doing it on 4 occasions. And Dr. Pimentel was sharing with me this afternoon. He said, you know, Sandy, you need to realize that timing is everything. I was going to go right in the nose. Timing is everything. The first corporation, well, let me explain. The corporation gets benefits from 3 ways. They get, there's a tax aspect to this, which I won't go into, but they get tax. The net cost of this project to the corporation is 0. Again, they get the public relations, advertising, goodwill, new product introduction, entertainment. Then they get all of those. That is, I've had that estimated by consultants at anywhere between $35 and $100 million a year in value. And then the third thing they get is they get to know that they're doing the right thing and trying to put the planet on a sustainable path. Who knows? Maybe some corporations have a little morality. All right, now you know the 3 benefits. First corporation to sign up to do this was Swiss Re in Zurich. Swiss Re in Zurich. My contact was Dr. Thomas Streif, and the last phone call, or the second to last phone call I had with him was, please be patient, Captain Anderson. You are in the pipeline to be funded. The deal was done. I had done it. I found a partner. Swiss Re wanted to get the message out to people. Okay, Swiss Re wanted to get the message out to people because they were the ones that were paying for the damage. Okay, so I hung up the phone call and the deal was done. 10 days later was 9/11, and Swiss Re was a major underwriter on the World Trade Center. They almost went out of business. I got to speed it up a little bit here. Next one was Time Warner. Time Warner loved the idea, absolutely loved it. The guy I was talking with, the vice president of tax, he's pacing back and forth across the room. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is great. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And he was telling me more things about the tax shelter than I even knew. He said, he gave me a letter. You'll have your money in 30 days. Timing is everything, David. During those 30 days, the AOL merger popped its head back up again. Remember when that was dead for a long time, then all of a sudden it came back? Well, maybe you guys don't remember that. But anyway, AOL brought with them $10 billion in lost carry-forwards. So any tax savings were out the window. That was the end of Hewlett-Packard. I mean, that was the end of Time Warner. Then I went on to Wachovia, and then I went on to Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard gave me a letter saying, I won't go into it, but they said, yeah, we'll do this. And I turned around to purchase the ship, and it was gone. Because you have to buy the ship at the right price in order to make this work. So that was the end of it for a while. And then I went off and did something else. I was fooling around. I invented a cure for male pattern baldness, believe it or not. It works like a bear, too. So there's nothing else to do. And then another ship came my way. Good to see. Now I've got this vessel. What I need, anybody in the room can do it. Anybody in the room who can put me in front of an executive at a corporation that's doing about $1 billion a year in sales, which is not a big one really, I guess, anymore. but $1 billion a year in gross sales. I'll give them the same deal I did Swiss Re, Time Warner, Hewlett Packard, and Wachovia. And we'll get this vessel and we'll get it going. Now, you guys in this room are on board. You're all part of the program. The first event would probably be alongside of the New England Aquarium in Boston. And I think the guy we're going to get is going to be Jimmy Buffett. So we got Jimmy Buffett singing. We got food. We got a big rally. We have speeches, people talking. Dr. Pimentel will be there because he's one of the main speakers on the subject. And then what we do is we pop up the live video conferencing screen. And now I've never heard of anybody doing this before. Maybe you guys have. I've never heard of it. But it's going to be a live video conferencing screen. It's going to have 4 locations on the screen. There's going to be one location up in the corner. There's going to be the ship and the crew and the crowd on the dock and all that. And then the 3 other screens are going to be 3 other locations around the world. 3 other universities. Could be a fishermen's co-op in Newfoundland. Could be a cattlemen's association in Argentina. Any group of people anywhere, as long as they're average citizens, as long as they're concerned about their planet, they're going to be on the camera. They're going to be on the screen. And people right off the street, right on the wharf in Boston, are going to get to walk up to the mic and ask somebody a question somewhere around the world. In other words, this program is designed to do for the world what Walter Cronkite did for my dormitory living room. In my dormitory living room, there were 3 couches, and guys sat around and they watched the movies and they said, oh shit, man, what are we going to do? This war's terrible. I don't want to go to this war. Well, that's what the ship thing is going to do. Same program. So that's basically it. I'm trying to get you guys involved and get you excited. I need more speaking engagements. I need more people involved. I want people to sign up for the program, and we'll go forward together. And that's what I have to say. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you all very much.
They tried to get me fired 3 times here at the university. So I must be doing something right based on your perspective. But here's someone I advised not to go to graduate school. My husband, I don't remember that. But
I remembered it. That's the advice I ever got.
anyway, comments and questions.
Don't all jump up at once.
Look like you sold all of them, huh?
I don't know. I'll ask you a question. Do you think we can do something like this or not?
Well, I'm sure they're convinced on the global
I'm sorry?
climate
I think
change.
it has a lot of potential.
Well, what's the missing element? What's missing? Potential is one thing. What do we need to make it?
Your corporate backer.
Okay, I need to get in to speak to someone. I need to get in and talk to an officer of a major corporation. I don't have time to do it again like I did it before, but they've also changed the rules slightly, which means if I want to get in to see a major corporate officer, I have to talk to him about the tax, because corporations don't give a shit about the environment. Trust me, it's all lip service. However, they've changed the tax law now based on some things that have happened over the last few years. They now say that if a corporation enters into an agreement, enters into a venture for the purpose of reducing their tax obligation, then their deduction is equal to their expense, meaning you can't get a multiple write-off. So if I write a letter and I mention tax in the letter, doesn't make me wrong, doesn't make this venture, not legal. It doesn't change anything, but it gives the IRS the chance to say, but you discussed tax in the first letter, so therefore tax was a motivator. I don't want to do that because I want my tax advantage to work, because if it works for one corporation, then I'll make it work for 13 or 14 more. Take the last one. That's it. So I can't do that. So I need somebody to say something to somebody else, maybe David knows somebody on the board somewhere, say, talk to this guy because he's got a deal. You're going to make money with the deal, but he doesn't want to start writing letters to tell you about it. He wants to walk in and tell you about it. And I'll sell the deal. I did it 4 times already, so I know it'll work. I just have had bad timing. But now I've got a good ship. When you saw, you've got to go forward. Yeah, I've got that ship now, and if I can get that at the right price. Then this is our Sinosure. This is our focus point. This is the Planet Earth ship. It goes from port to port, country to country all around the world. And every port we partner up with the local university. We have the speeches. All we're doing is we're stirring the pot and getting people mad. And when we get enough people signed up, bear in mind, I'm going to organize a march in Washington. I said, there will be a big difference. There will be a big difference. In Vietnam, we had a slogan, and you may remember it. Remember the Vietnam slogan? I see a fellow back there I don't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your effing war. That's the way we talk back then. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we're going to have our own slogan. We've got our sign ship be the Planet Earth ship. The name of our program is Planet Earth Ship Movement. And our slogan is 5432. We don't want your CO2. 5432. We don't want your CO2. Come on, if we get 1 million people on the mall in Washington shaking their fist, let me tell you something. We're going to be the best friend of all the politicians who are now deniers of climate change. All of a sudden, they're going to come running down the step. Each one of them is going to grab a microphone and tell them how much they believe in climate change. Corporations are going to start building sustainable products for us. Oh, we always meant to do this. Corporations aren't going to do anything until we create the demand. We need to create the demand. And the adults aren't going to do it. And nobody else is going to do it. We need to organize ourselves, and we need to demand change. I'm looking at some weary faces here, so that's the end of it.
All right. Well, again, thank you.
All right, very good.
We'll invest in your ship, but we don't have $1 billion.
Well, I need contacts. If somebody can get me in to see the right guy, I'll do it.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.